Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. On July 16th, 1945, the father of the atomic bomb, J. Robert Oppenheimer, realized what mass destruction he had brought upon the world and what new era had begun. One of the most controversial ideas that go along with frontiers in history would be the creation of the atomic bomb and how it changed the course of history. On August 6, 1945, the first of two atomic bombs, nicknamed Little Boy, was dropped over the Japanese city of Hiroshima and turned the once lively city to dust. Then, 3 days later, the second atomic bomb, also known as Fat Man, was dropped on the Japanese city of Nagasaki. The short-term impact would have been the casualties and the immediate fallout, and it was estimated that around 200,000 people died altogether. The long-term impact being that it was the first demonstration of what nuclear power would mean for warfare. And immediately after this, the USSR put their scientists to work and started a war between the United States and Soviet Union, a very cold one. In August of 1939, Albert Einstein and fellow scientist Leo Szilard drafted and sent a letter to United States President Franklin D. Roosevelt warning him of Germany's atomic bomb program. December 7th, 1941 was a sad and miserable day as the Japanese launched a surprise attack on the American naval shipyard Pearl Harbor to destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Although luckily, they were not able to manage to hit any of the repair yards, allowing the Navy to be back in action soon. And in the words of Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve. This attack pushed FDR to publicly declare war on Japan and its allies. On December 28, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt authorized the formation of the Manhattan Project to start development of the atomic bomb. J. Robert Oppenheimer would be appointed as head scientist of the project. And in 1943, the United States launched the Alsos mission to learn the extent of the German nuclear program and other scientific projects. Whilst a year later, on June 6, 1944, the United States, Britain, and Canada launched the largest land invasion ever recorded on the beaches of Normandy, France, therefore entering the European theater. With the military might and strength of Britain, Canada, and the United States, along with French rebels helping, the Allies would win battle after battle against the Nazi forces. And after 2.5 months of fighting, France would be successfully liberated on August 19, 1944, when the Allies were able to reach the French capital of Paris, with plans of marching on Berlin. On July 4th, 1945, American troops entered the German capital of Berlin, therefore closing the curtain on the European theater and putting America's full focus on Japan. After the invasion of Germany and the Allied victory in Europe, America immediately switched its focus to its enemy to the west. The Pacific Front saw some of the worst fighting in the war, as American troops fought tooth and nail for every inch of land. But the Japanese forces fought just as hard, if not harder. The factor that made the Japanese forces so deadly was their vigor and patriotism, as they saw dying as the most honorable way to show pride and loyalty in their country. It also didn't help that during the fighting, Japanese soldiers would deliberately kill enemy medics and non-combatants. April 1st, 1945, the United States Marines and 10th Army stormed the beaches of Okinawa, subsequently taking the final island between them and the Japanese mainland and facing a difficult decision. President Harry S. Truman had a choice that would change the course of history. Truman must either begin an invasion of mainland Japan and lose the lives of an estimated 1.7 to 4 million U.S. troops, or begin the first field test for the experimental atomic bomb. The bomb was finished and ready for use on July 31st, 1945, and was meant to be used as a backup plan in case the Japanese wouldn't yield. Truman would end up authorizing the use of the weapon of mass destruction on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. Meanwhile, Japan had devised a plan to use fleas infected with the bubonic plague on the United States, and the tactic had already been field tested during the invasion of China, with it working perfectly. The plan was for the operation to commence on September 22nd, 1945, but before this could happen, the United States military dropped Little Boy over the Japanese province of Hiroshima. 60,000 people died in a split second, and many more due to radiation poisoning, though the Japanese would not yield and refused to surrender. This forced President Truman's hand as he was forced to authorize the second and most powerful bomb to be dropped on Nagasaki. 139,000 people died, half of them due to injuries or radiation poisoning. This led to Emperor Hirohito to make a public announcement of Japan's surrender and the end of the most brutal war in human history. The bombs were a means to an end to a war that felt like it had been going on forever and seemed like it would never end. Though the bombs not only affected the people in Japan, but also the men and women who worked on it, specifically Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer truly believed that what he and his fellow scientists were making was something for the better of the world. But when he witnessed what destruction the bomb caused, he was horrified. His mental health would then decline. Though back to the Japanese citizens, as the radiation from the bomb would make the cities almost uninhabitable and kill thousands of people. With the bombs being dropped, it sparked a whole new kind of warfare, and it did not take long for other countries to begin development of their own nuclear weapons. Eventually, the Soviet Union would successfully test their own atomic bomb on August 29th, 1949, in Semipalatinsk, Kazakhstan. This would only add tension between other nations, as the United States grew wary of the impending Soviet threat. The bombing would lead to a 45-year war with no direct military campaigns against each other. During the tension, many different proxy wars were started by the global superpowers, with the major ones being the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Soviet-Afghan War. Thankfully, there were some goods that came from the bombs, like the halt of war almost altogether, as a threat of nuclear warfare scared nations from attacking each other nearly as much as they used to. Millions of people have been affected by the introduction of nuclear warfare all across the globe. Even the men and women who made the device of destruction. No single invention has changed the course of history and how we think as this one has. It started as an idea, then Oppenheimer and his fellow scientists made that idea a reality. And this single action affected him and changed him mentally. The bombs would lead to many deaths, proxy wars, and nuclear fears. However, it will put a halt to large-scale wars between global superpowers for decades, with the threat of nuclear deterrence ever rising and putting each other in a nuclear checkmate. Though what is ahead in the future as weapons of mass destruction are manufactured like clockwork? The question is, what is in store for the human race as we brace for an artificial extinction? With Russia recently pulling out of the START Treaty and therefore removing the last nuclear regulations between the United States and Russia, and the threat of nuclear warfare reaching a new high in decades.